Comic Boom.
Hey guys, Comic Boom here to review Lois Lane #1. Greg Rucka gifts us with his talent for writing female characters once again with Lois Lane. And I guess this is appropriate. Now, Greg Rucka wrote Wonder Woman Rebirth. He had a long run on that for about 25 issues, and it's generally been considered an acclaimed run. I had some minor little gripes with it, but for the most part it worked, and Wonder Woman's never quite been as good since Rucka left. Greg Rucka he's well known for writing great characters. He writes Lazarus, and he also writes Black Magic, which is really good. He wrote Queen and Country, all involving really great and strong female protagonists. So it's actually quite appropriate that he's writing Lois Lane. Now, Lois Lane, of course, is someone that in the New 52, Lois Lane got really short thrift because basically Wonder Woman was the Superman, and Lois Lane was portrayed. She was an afterthought. She was largely ignored in the New 52, other than she was a villain. I think she was almost like a Brainiac-like villain for a while in the New 52. Anyways, it's very forgettable. In Rebirth, Lois Lane, of course, has come back full bore as, of course, being married to Superman, having a son, Jonathan Kent. She's been terribly written under Bendis. Her dialogue's been terrible. She's been written like a bitch. She's been keeping secrets from Superman. They've had this really odd relationship now, which is, I thought was a little bit ill-defined. It's finally, we get a little bit more answers in terms of exactly what the nature of Lois and Clark's relationship is to the general public. Like, are they together? Aren't they? I mean, you talk about fake news or the truth. What is the truth regarding their relationship? We got some clarity here a little bit. Basically, for whatever reason, Lois Lane decides she's always got a room in Chicago. Now, why she would want to get a room at the Drake Hotel in Chicago to do all her investigative reporting and then have the Daily Planet rent an expensive room at the Drake Hotel in Chicago when she lives in Metropolis and is married to Clark Kent, and they have a son together, who I suppose is never around because he's in another multiverse aging 7 years, but that's another story. I don't really get that, but I guess it is what it is. In order to maintain appearances, I guess Lois and Clark, they're married, but they live in a world now that's filled with gossip. Lois Lane is occasionally, at one point she's caught kissing Superman, and there's a picture of her kissing Superman that's floating around the internet, and there's a great scene here where Lois is talking to Clark, and they're just it's the morning after they've had some intimacy, and they're walking through downtown Chicago, and a random stranger calls Lois Lane a derogative term, calls her an SLUT, and that really upsets Clark. And of course he calls her that because of the news. You know, she's cheating on Clark, and they're both well known. Lois Lane and Clark Kent are both mini celebrities in the DC universe. So it's kind of interesting that really hasn't been explored yet. Maybe it will be explored more in this series and in other series. But the fact that Clark Kent and Lois Lane are mini celebrities in their own right within the DC universe, that in itself adds a little bit of extra pressure when you think of the fact that, well, Superman, of course, Clark Kent is protecting his identity as Superman, and they got a Superboy son on top of it. So so there is that now, but that's more of a digression, and a humorous digression, and a fun little digression in this story, because really what this is about Lois Lane showing off Lois Lane's ability as a reporter. She's the best investigative reporter in the DC universe, and I listened to the Word Balloon podcast interview that John Citrus did on his Word Balloon podcast, where he interviewed Greg Rucka, and Greg Rucka really wants to exemplify the fact and give a lot of emphasis on Lois Lane's ability as an investigative reporter, and it really shines through well here. Now, straight up, there's a great scene here with Lois Lane, holding the White House accountable. She's got White House press credentials. Of course she would. She's Lois Lane, and she's obviously very good at investigating various things. She's at any one time she's working on 6 or 7 different stories, and she's working on at least 2 or 3 different stories in the context of this opening issue. And one of the stories at the end is just she holds the White House accountable for some immigration scandal involving monetizing the taking of children away from at the border. And some people, I think, on the internet are a little upset because it hits a little bit too close to home, probably because they're Trump supporters. I don't know. And I guess if Trump does it in real life and it's an atrocity, that's okay. But if somebody talks about it in a comic book and suggests it being what it actually is, which is a crime and a travesty, that apparently it's wrong, I say that a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I'm not necessarily a big fan of politics in my comic books, but when it's obviously villainy, when it's obviously wrong, is that politics? Well, you call it what you want. I call it immoral. It didn't bother me at all. Some people, I think, because we live in these politically sensitive times, it's funny that they're so sensitive about what's going on in the United States that any comic book that portrays it and suggests that it might be wrong when it obviously is, they get really upset about it. Well, okay, you're entitled to your point of view. Then this comic book's not for you. This comic book's not for you. There's no question. Look, Greg Rucka on Twitter. Greg Rucka is it's fair to say he's probably liberal. In fact, I'm fairly certain he is based on some of the things he tweets. And I respect that. I can tell by his writing of Lazarus and Queen and Country. And in his statements and interviews here and there, he's more liberal than he is conservative. Conservative, let's put it that way. But really, politics really doesn't play a part here. Lois Lane, this opening issue, if you read politics into this, then I think that you're not reading it correctly. And I say that with great respect because she's an investigative reporter, and the best investigative reporters, it's got nothing to do with politics. It's got to do with right and wrong. It doesn't matter if you're conservative or liberal or somewhere in between, it's wrong. If there's something going on at the border, that's wrong. If the government's trying to hide something, it's wrong, whether it's in the DC universe or ours. And if there's a little bit of reflection in a comic book of what's happening in our own world, I'm not going to lose sleep over it. Plus, for what it's worth, it plays a very small part in the opening issue. The central issue, the central story, which is building in this issue, is hinted at right on the front page, right in the front cover, which says, she's uncovered the most dangerous secret in the DC universe. Now she just has to prove it. And that's really what it's all about. It's about uncovering truth. Let's face it, obviously we live in a society now where truth is under attack. Journalism is a very dangerous occupation. There's even a journalist, a respected journalist who works in the Kremlin, who was killed in this issue. She's got a contact with Lois Lane. Lois Lane knows where this journalist hides her notes, and she sends Renee Montoya, the Question, to Moscow to obtain these hidden notes that this murdered journalist had in Moscow at the Kremlin. This is really good stuff, and it's really great to see Renee Montoya again. We in fact now have a DC universe where we have two questions. There are two questions. What are those two questions? Well, we got the male question and a female question. How appropriate. But no, we've got Renee Montoya, of course, who is fantastic as the Question during she was the last Question, really, and before Rebirth, she was the Question. I loved Renee Montoya coming out of Gotham Central. She became the Question, and what a fantastic character. And for Rucka to bring her back is great because he wrote her the best when she was Renee Montoya when he wrote Gotham Central with Ed Brubaker. And of course, the other Question we have is John Sage, I think. Vic Sage, I think, is the male version of the Question. Vic Sage, and he's actually playing out in the pages of Leviathan. And so why do we have two questions? What are those? How do we end up with two questions in our universe? I don't know. But right now, the continuity in the DC universe is in flux. We got various characters being portrayed in the DC universe, but we got 7 crises. We got continuities being mumbled and jumbled up with Young Justice. We got. I'm not really sure exactly what's going on here. We even got the Legion of Superheroes coming back. So exactly all these different incarnations of these characters that are coming back slowly and getting teased at, how their histories all coincide, how we can end up with these two questions, I'm not really sure. But it's nice to see. And it's fair to say that this is definitely going to be a female-centric series, which I think is good. It's Lois Lane. We got Renee Montoya helping Lois Lane out. This is a lot of fun. Great scene here between Lois Lane and Clark Kent. It's clear that Clark supports Lois, Lois supports them. It sounds here that they have a decent relationship. It's much better dialogue here than Bendis. Thank God Ruck is writing this and not Bendis, because the dialogue here, it reads well. Lois Lane's got a sense of humor about it. Even the maid, when it was cleaning up Lois Lane's hotel room the next morning, the maid could tell that Lois had been with some company the night before, and she assumed it was Superman and not Lois Lane's husband, Clark Kent. And of course, well, obviously, we're all in on the joke, but the maid isn't. And it's really nice to see Rucka sort of play with that a bit. It had humor, it had good dialogue. It's really building to a story. It's going to be interesting to see why this reporter was killed in the Kremlin. What secrets was she keeping? What is this massive secret that Lois Lane has discovered? I'm really in for this for the long haul. Is there going to be an overlap between this and Leviathan? Is Leviathan the big secret that she has to prove? I suspect it's more than that. I really enjoy this opening issue, and I would encourage other people to pick it up as well. Don't worry about the politics. If I got to tell you right now, I watch the news all the time, and if you don't like this because of the minor the minor political references, then yeah, you better not read it. I mean, she is a reporter after all, and I have to say, and I said this on Twitter, I cannot not imagine a better time to have a Lois Lane comic book than in the world we live in right now, where journalists are held to higher scrutiny than ever before, where they're constantly putting their lives on the line, as they always have, and they're getting some much-needed recognition despite the calls of fake news from all sides of the political spectrum. Truth is still out there, and when you have Superman representing truth and justice, is it really all that surprising that the wife of Superman, Lois Lane, fights for truth as a journalist? I don't think so. This ain't rocket science, guys. Check out Lois Lane #1. Tell me what you think of it. Follow me on Twitter at Metropolis40. And until next time, Comic Boom out.